It's good to see everyone out. As we begin, if you don't mind, let's go to God in a word of prayer as we start class. Let's pray together. Father in heaven, we thank you for the day that you've given us, God, and for all the blessings we have. Thank you, God, for this time that we have to study your word together, to be encouraged by other Christians, to know that throughout this world there are those serving you this day. It's such an encouragement to us. And may we stand with you, God, instead of against you. May we learn from Laban's life the lessons that we can apply in our own. Pray that you be with all the teachers this morning and students in their classes, that they'll learn more about you and that they'll also make application and make changes where need be. We thank you, God, for your love for us, most importantly for your Son. And it's in his name we pray. Amen. All right, so we're talking about Laban this morning. I'm sure this is a character you've studied a lot about in the past, right? We've talked about Laban quite a bit, but it's not one that I don't think I've ever sat down to intentionally just study Laban. So when it came up, that one sounded like a good challenge, so we'll start with him today. First thing I want to talk about is just some background about him. First of all, what does his name mean? Or what did you find that his name may have meant from your study? Leanne? Yeah, looked it up. Thank you, Leanne. Said white. That's the same thing I saw as well, to be white. What's that mean? I have no clue. I don't know if this is just a parental wish. I have no idea what happened here, but that was his name. That's what it meant as far as we know. Where did this guy come from? What do we know about his genealogy, about his past, his family? All right. His father is a brother to Abraham's father. So yes, if we look at the family tree here, he was from the lineage of Shem. He was a Semite. So he was Semitic, not anti-Semitic. And he actually fell through that same line. And so we see Terah had 3 sons, Nahor, Abraham, and Haran. And then if we flip on to where we can actually zoom in on Terah, we can see that Bethuel and Laban came from Nahor, whereas Isaac came from Abraham. And so Laban was the grandnephew or great-nephew of Abraham, if you want to look at it that way. His direct nephew is Bethuel, and then this was Bethuel's son. Whereabout do they live? We're looking at the location. Where can we find Laban? Say it again? All right, he was Assyria. Not Assyria, but he was Syrian, Aramean. And so Aramea, Syria, depending on your translation, if you look at chapter 25, verse 20, it calls him Laban the Aramean. If you're looking at the English Standard Version or the New American Standard Version, King James says he's Assyrian. And so these are inhabitants of the Mesopotamian region as an ethnic identity. We don't know a lot about the background of Syria, of the Arameans. We just don't have a lot of information about where they came from, but we know that Padan Aram is either the plain of Syria or possibly the road of Aram. It describes that area that he was in. So we have this city of Haran. And so again, I know this is focusing on Laban, but when you think about Jacob, it was Jacob who then took this journey up to Haran. That's 450 miles from Hebron, where he was. 450 miles. This is not driving in your car and getting gas every 200 because you're about to fall asleep, right? This is a trip. This is a long trip. And if you think about, again, if they had a caravan of camels, which I don't know that Jacob would have at this time, but if you had a caravan of camels, they averaged about 18 to 25 miles a day. So with a entourage, you're looking at 20 to 28 days of travel to get there. Now, Jacob didn't have the same wealth that we see from his fathers, and so probably would have gotten there a little bit more quickly, but nonetheless, just to give you a sense of what that is. I want to look primarily today at the character of Laban, and I want to spread that out in 3 different phases that we see him. First of all, his character when his sister is getting married. We see then his character when his daughter is getting married, and finally his employment contract with Jacob. Now, between that first and second event, any idea of how many years passed in that period? About how long between his sister and his daughter's marriage? Mark? Okay. Okay. All right, so we have a relative distance there. You're guessing things I don't even know right now. Right. Yeah, at least 50 years. By a lot of accounts, you're looking at close to 96, 97 years. Again, just some of the dates I looked at. Isaac married Rebekah in 2026 BC, and Jacob went to Haran in 1930 and 1929 BC. So you're looking 96, 97 years in that period of time. Okay? Maybe it's as early as 50, but again, you're talking about a long time here. Before we even jump into the character that we see of Laban, one of the things that jumps out at me when I look at his life is one's character changes over the course of a century. The Laban that we meet in this first account, while there were hints at who we see him being later, we see a different man than what we see later. And that plays positively and negatively. May have been a very solid, intact Christian at 20, but a lot of things can happen between 20 and 60, 20 and 80. And so you can see a decline in people. Likewise, you can see somebody who is just living in the awfulness of the world become just such an upstanding, wonderful encouragement. A lot of things can happen in this life, and we are not defined by who we are today. It's one of the biggest things I look at with Laban. In his case, I think he was better off at the front. We'll talk about that here in a minute. But again, I want to look at it through these three stages. So kind of an open-ended question during his sister's marriage to Isaac. What examples do you see that demonstrate the kind of man that he was? Tell me what we learn about his character and where you find that when he's giving his sister away in marriage. Go ahead, Leanne. All right, he was interested in the gifts he got. What makes you say that? What do you see that shows that? We're in chapter 24 there. Got to keep my brain fixed in time here as well. No, you're good. Probably around, 29, 32? Yes, he noticed the valuables, and specifically in verse 30, as soon as he saw the ring and the bracelets, boom, he's ready to meet this dude. We get a live one, Bob says, absolutely. And so there is a tendency that we see toward greed here already. Was that the first instance of his running to be hospitable, though? If you back up in 28, we actually see in verse 29, Rebekah had a brother whose name was Laban. Laban ran out to the man to the spring. Then in 31, as he arrives and sees his sister and the valuables that she's got on her, boom, now he's running to the man as well. So there was already a tendency toward hospitality that was already expressed there. And so we see some good things about him. And even in 31 and 32, again, looking at the positive side of him, the he here gets a little confusing, but he said in verse 31, I prepared the house and a place for the camels. So the man came to the house, and again, it looks like this is tied to the man, but it would make more sense that it would be Laban taking these actions, or Laban's servants, to unharness the camels, to give straw and fodder to them, to wash his feet, and wash the feet of the men who are with him. And you see a hospitality here expressed in his home, but again, you're also caught by that tendency toward greed because you know what this man's going to end up to be. And so in hindsight, we're seeing those things. How about his attitude toward his sister? What was Laban's role in this whole piece with Rebekah? Go ahead, Leanne. Yeah, it seems like he is. Yeah, absolutely. So I want you to jump down to verse 50 because I was in the same boat. His dad's dead. But what's verse 50 say? Yes, that both Laban and Bethuel confirmed. And so his father is alive according to verse 50, but every indication is that he's not the guy here. So we see some passing of clanship, if you will. So Laban is kind of presented as the head of the clan. Some have thought maybe this was just a figurative, that Laban and Bethuel, that he actually was dead. Whereas other commentators say maybe he was alive but more incapacitated. Like he is just not of sound ability to lead the clan. And so that has been passed to him. So we see a headship over the family. Very good. What else do we see? What role does he play for his sister? Can somebody turn over to Song of Solomon 8, verse 8? Song of Solomon 8, verse 8. Because we do see here Laban fulfilling a role that he should be fulfilling. David, go ahead. All right, what shall we do for our sister on the day when she's spoken for? There is a responsibility that the brother feels for caring for his sister's marriage, making sure that she gets taken care of. So the head of the family is an attribute here that plays into it as well. But even before that, there's a right responsibility that the brother would have had to be engaged in this process. And we see that both in the Bible, in Song of Solomon. We also see that in extra biblical sources where the brothers are involved in that process. So we see, again, just kind of checking off our list here, we do see a dutiful brother. He's doing his job. We see some early, eager hospitality. Did I spell that right? Hospitable. Yes, I did. We also see that tendency to greed early on in this passage. We also see that he's familiar with Yahweh, Jehovah. Again, we don't have to spell it because we don't get the vowels, but we see he has a familiarity with the God of heaven. How do we know that? What can I look at that shows us that? All right, he says it in verse 50. He refers to the Lord. Where else does he refer to the Lord? All right, 56, we see it there as well. And we even see it earlier in the text as well. When he meets this man, what's it say in verse 31? All right, he says, come in, O blessed of the Lord. And the word that's used there is not Elohim, which you would expect if somebody was familiar with a Lord. It is Jehovah. It is Yahweh. It is the God that, how would you otherwise know about this God? And so he was familiar with Jehovah. He promptly calls him blessed of Yahweh. Now, this man had said nothing in our text so far about the Lord, and yet he greets him before he would have even had a chance to describe who he was. Oh, come, blessed of Yahweh, blessed of Jehovah. And so again, it demonstrates his familiarity with God. Now, it may have just been his polite description, because there was an assumption that if you were wealthy, that you were blessed by God. Right? So I see a wealthy man, so he must have been blessed by God. Now, we would never think that, would we? We would never see somebody who's doing well and say, well, God must have blessed. Yeah, we have that same thing in our culture today. That, especially with the televangelist. You give to God, he'll give you 100-fold. And so if I see somebody who's wealthy, he must have done a really good job giving. But that may be a polite assumption he made, but little did he know how true those words were. This literally was a man from Yahweh, from Jehovah. And he ascribed blessing to him. So we see that. He's familiar with Yahweh. He's head of the clan. What do we find about his business dealings? Leanne made a reference here in verse 55, somewhat unethical. Somewhat. I'll give him credit right here. In verse 55 through 58, her brother and her mother said, let the young woman remain with us a while, at least 10 days. Now the servant had a mission to do. He was very excited. He found exactly what he was supposed to find. He had prayed to God, and the exact circumstances happened. And so he spends time with the family. He does his thing, and now he wants to go back home. And what had he given at this point? Bracelet, the rings, the gifts. So if you look at verse 24 and 51, you already see they had already consented to the marriage. He had paid them the bridal price. So when I say I'm ready to go to take this bride that I have paid now, you and her, for her marriage, for them to even say, well, yet let the young woman remain for a while, for 10 days. And he said, no, don't delay me. Well, let's call the woman and ask her. Not to say who cares, But that wasn't the custom. The custom was you paid the bridal price, they were due. So even asking for more and asking her for her opinion, it was just unethical. This was a business transaction in that sense that had happened. And so it hints at Laban's unscrupulous conduct, the greed that we might later see from him in his life. Anything else we see about his character here? Go ahead, Bob.
Verse 53 says, the servant also gives brother.
Absolutely.
Maybe he's hoping for.
Yeah, and that has been my thought as well. Maybe if we keep her here a little bit longer, I'm going to get more. Very, very good, very true. Mark?
I was going to say, look at, think of it. What's he doing?
Seems kind of like the very beginning of a pattern that might work for him. Right. Renegotiate the terms. Very good. Anything else we see about his character from this example? The main one that I had identified, but that's not all there is, I'm sure. But let's move on to the next phase then. Again, roughly 100 years, a little less, have passed here, and it's time for Jacob to come, and he's looking for a marriage. He's looking here. The first question I had is, why did Rebekah send him to Laban if he was this horribly unscrupulous, unethical, compromised man? Why would she send him, her son, to her brother, if that were the case?
Families.
All right. So,
I mean,
yeah, to take care of him.
take care of him. He'll be reasonable at taking.
All right. She has a confidence in him that he'll take care of him. What did Jacob come with? Yeah, compare that to these other marriages where you did have the entourage and all the money. Again, it makes me wonder about Jacob's circumstance in leaving. There were really two reasons why Jacob was leaving, according to the Bible. One, because your brother's going to kill you. And then the one that she gives her husband, he needs to find a wife. Normally, when the son would go to find a wife, the father would send him with many gifts to pay that bridal price. That didn't happen here. In fact, he has to indenture himself to pay that price. And again, this question of why to Laban, it supports my thought that he has changed over time. Go ahead, Mark. Good point. Good point. Because we have Esau marrying the Canaanite. Yeah, good point. So yeah, the father may not have been involved in either one. I look at this as an example of maybe he was a much better brother then. She remembers the good things about him, and while there were hints, maybe he hadn't gone off the deep end yet. I'm reminded of 1 Corinthians 13, verse 7. We believe all things, we hope all things. I want to believe the best about my brethren. And I think the same would be true here, that while there was a tendency toward greed and maybe changing the terms of the deal, maybe she's hoping the best, and she did see the dutiful brother, the head of the clan, the one who cared for me as I was getting married. But that's not the attitude that we see further on. So what examples do you see in the text that now give us a better picture, again, just during this marriage process, of who Laban is in these chapters? Again, we're in 29 through 30 now. What tells us about his character here? Go ahead, Bob.
Well, we know that Rachel. So he for Rachel.
Yeah.
Sounds terrible to say. And wedding night, apparently, we don't know exactly, but
Yeah.
gives wine, so forth.
All right.
To consummate.
And so we see a change in the terms of the agreement. They had made an agreement for Rachel. And again, remember why. He had no price to pay for this bride. So he gives himself in labor for 7 years, and he changes the terms. Now, the terms are very clear on the front end. I mean, there's no doubt about the terms. If you look in chapter 29, verses 18 through 20, it's not like I'll serve you for your daughter, which, Laban would have a loophole then. He very specifically says, I will serve you 7 years for your younger daughter, Rachel. Just in case you were confused, let me make sure I clear that up. This is the one I actually want. And Laban makes that agreement. Did he intend? Again, I know we're looking at the text, only what we have. Did he intend to give Rachel? Did he intend to deceive Jacob at this time. He very well may have. Let's give him the benefit of the doubt. What may have been going through this man's mind at this point? Let's assume he didn't. Go ahead, Julian. All right, I've got 7 years. So to get her married off, and I think about my kids, right? Tori's 14 now, right? So if I add 7 to her, 21. Raven will be 23. So he's asking for a commitment right now, and my daughter, that I might struggle to get rid of, I got 7 years. Surely in 7 years, those dim eyes will get married, right? So again, I want to assign the best. He may have very well desired to manipulate the situation from the beginning, but I look at this text and maybe he's hoping that 7 years is enough time to marry off the older daughter, the less attractive daughter, as the text tells us. Again, contrast the marriage price when I think about chapter 24, when Abraham sent his servants to find that wife. Again, you iterated those things. 10 camels with goods, expensive gifts, all these things that Jacob did not have. And so that's a big contrast to what's there. So as we reach the end now of those 7 years, which not only did Jacob say 7 years goes by really fast, but the text doesn't give you a whole lot either during those 7 years. He worked. That's what we know. In verse 21, he comes back to his father-in-law, to-be. He says, "Give me my wife that I may go into her, for my time is completed." So Laban gathered together all the people of the place and made a feast. Now, this feast, what do we know about a feast of this time? We look at the weddings that we throw. Used to be 10 grand was a big wedding. 10 grand may pay for half a wedding now. It's a big deal, and so curse those of us who have daughters. Bob, tell me about that.
It would last multiple days.
All right.
People travel great distances. Had to put them up, maybe got to feed them. They can't.
Yeah.
Still, got a big crowd coming to this. So it's a
Absolutely. And you put that idea of days and family coming in. When we talk about family coming in, you can come in an hour or so in Indy, right? Again, realize how much difference there is in travel here. We see an example of this in Judges 14. When Samson was throwing his feast, that's the time period that he gave them the riddle. That if they could figure it out, he would give them those changes of clothes. Samson prepared a feast there, and so the young men used to do, he says, within the 7 days of the feast, if you figure this riddle out, right, I'll give you those things. And so he had committed to 30 changes of garments. So again, this is a long feast. This was not a wedding day. This was a wedding period. He didn't see his wife to be. She was shrouded. 29 verse 23, we look at how did this happen? How did you get your bride changed? We see the unscrupulous behavior of Laban there, but he didn't do it alone. And I appreciate Tanya making that comment as we were studying this before. Maybe she felt pressured by her father. Let's assume she just couldn't talk to him, but she's going into this man that is not her husband, not intended to be her husband. Is that just it? Could she not use a word? Right? So she was complicit in all of this. In 29-23, he took his daughter Leah, brought her to Jacob. He went into her. It talks about the servant as well because of the role that Zilpah will pay. In the morning, behold, it was Leah. So again, Jacob said to Laban, "What is this that you have done to me? Did I not serve you for Rachel? Why then have you deceived me?" And Laban said, "It's not so done in our country to give the younger before the firstborn." And Laban finds himself in that problem. I've committed my younger. It's not done so in our country. And he knew that 7 years ago. He could have made it a term of the agreement, but he chose not to. Instead, it feels like he got stuck and had the option of how he was going to handle this. And I guess that's another lesson that I see in this. When is the test of our character? Right? This was a test of Laban's character. Even if he assumed that he would do the upright thing, as this time got closer and closer, he chose to say nothing, to renegotiate, to talk about the difficulty he had. Instead, when the time came, he was just going to do the old wife swap. And that was going to be okay. And so the test of our character comes when our backs are against the wall. Are we going to do the right thing and stand for what's right? Or are we going to give in to the norms of our culture, of our society, and do that thing that's easy, that's expected of us? And what we see from Laban is that he would rather violate his covenant than violate social mores that say you give out your first daughter before the second. Go ahead, Mark. Good point. Good point. Right. Yeah, there may not have been a knowledge of that. And so he solved that problem under the cover of darkness. And again, how do we respond when our back against the wall as well? When I think about Jephthah, that's what came to mind for me. Jephthah made a very rash vow. He prayed to God and made a vow to him that if you'll give the Ammonites into my hand, then anything that comes out of my house I will sacrifice to you. And what was the thing that came out of his house? His daughter. What did Jephthah do? He offered his daughter. Gave her time to mourn and offered her. Now, I'm not saying go make rash vows. What I am saying is there is an ability to keep a commitment that you made even when it's a stupid one. And more importantly, how about we think about our commitments before we make them? We do see those who stood up when the time came. Now, what we see in this section is a repeat of the narratives and the themes that are in the patriarchs. We see barrenness. And again, these are things that we've talked about several times, but just to show you how they've fallen again. We saw the barrenness that Sarah had, that Rebekah had, that Rachel had as a theme of the patriarchs. Another piece that we see is sibling rivalry. We saw it between Ishmael and Isaac. We saw it between Esau and Jacob, between Joseph and his brothers. And we see it here again now between Rachel and Leah. It's just that theme of what's happening during these times. And for Jacob, we see the theme of deception, especially here. Go ahead, Bob.
Laban would have known about Esau and Jacob.
Mm.
Jacob, our character. Our character.
Yeah.
And so
Right.
but you see those things takes we early on.
Yeah. Yeah, and maybe he did know about what happened between the brothers as well, for those who couldn't hear the comment, but very good point. And I think about, too, that that was one of the shaping moments for Jacob, right? Jacob coming to realize how he needed to change in his life. What could he say? What could he say in this moment apart from, you deceived me? That was any different than what happened between his mother and him and his father. Right? You think of these deceptions that have happened. Abraham and Isaac lied about their wives, how to deal with their neighbors. You have Lot's two daughters deceiving their father, getting him drunk in order to have children. Jacob deceived his father in order to receive the promised blessing. Laban deceived Jacob. You see these patterns over and over. Even Joseph deceiving his brothers, not revealing his character to them yet. It is this theme that we see throughout here. But it is absolutely a parallel deception that happens here. Here's another thing that I hadn't really thought about in how that Laban not only sinned against Jacob, but against his daughters. Consider the environment that he set up for two daughters whom you would suspect that he loved, right? Both Leah and Rachel. What environment did he set them up for? I've given you both into the hands of a man, and you have no option but to compete and have a rivalry for his affection. The father did that in this case. Was that his intent? I don't know. But again, if you look at how the society at that time, the first wife would have held rank over the second. I mean, that was just, again, the social norms of polygamy. In Leviticus 18:18, again, this was not in effect at this time, but the Lord would later regulate, you shall not take a woman as a rival wife to her sister, while her sister is still alive. It was specifically condemned because of the danger, not just polygamy, but specifically between sisters, this can be a problem. And yet Laban set that up. Now, big question here is, why did Jacob stay in the marriage? There's one theory that says the man was deceived getting something he didn't think he was going to get and had a right to say that wasn't the wife. I didn't know. Could have backed out of the marriage. Go ahead. All right. He really wanted to marry Rachel. And so even if he did have the right, which I don't know, even if he did have the right, walking away from that marriage would have threatened the very thing that he wanted most, right? He wanted Rachel. And he would have gotten, half of what he wanted here. And, there was also that sense, and we talked about this when Jason was teaching about dishonoring her, violating her. Even if she was complicit in it, she was damaged goods for another relationship. And that may have prevented him, again, from going further. But if you look in Exodus and Deuteronomy, every one of these scenarios, if a man seduces a virgin who's not engaged to be married and lies with her, he shall give her the bride price and make her his wife. Deuteronomy goes on to say he can never divorce her. So again, this was a choice by consent of both, and even at that, she's damaged goods, you have to pay the price, and you can't divorce her. It would be regulated later on. But I think more importantly, what I see in this is he didn't want to jeopardize his marriage to the one he wanted. All right, anything else from this that we learn about Laban's character in just the marriage arrangement itself? Because next we'll move on to the labor agreement. All right. What do we learn about this from the labor agreement then? We talked about his dishonorable, untrustworthy behavior here. What shows you that? What shows you about him? Go ahead, Dennis. Okay.
They're going well here. I can't.
All right. And so even when Jacob desires to leave, he looks at this selfishly, and he recognizes whose power? Inferentially here, he recognizes Jehovah's power, that I realize I've been blessed because of you, thus I don't want you to go. Not because I want to worship Jehovah, because I really like how this is working out for my herds and flocks. Now if you look in verse 25 of chapter 30, what was the trigger? What was the trigger that Jacob had a desire to leave this home? A couple things stated there. What do you see in Genesis 30, 25 and following? All right, so it's not just that he got Rachel, right? It's also that Rachel had her first child. So Joseph is born, that being a trigger. What else is his trigger? What does he say is his reason? Why does he want to leave? Liam? Oh. All right, he wants to make his own way.
He's been a hired hand for Michael. He's been an indentured servant, really.
Yeah.
Not even a hired hand. And cut his own path. Oh, he's done what his father-in-law.
All right, very good. And so, whereas in the past he had served Laban and for wages that had been agreed upon in some way or another, now he's wanting to cut his own path. What does it teach us as Christians today? What lesson can you take away from this arrangement? Go ahead, Leanne. All right. All right, so there's an expectation as a pattern for us that we break that dependence. And even though he had worked for his wives, what things apart from Leah and Rachel were Jacob's? What did he own apart from marriage? None of this was his. He had nothing. And now that he has the child he wants and a bunch of other children that he got, he looks at, I want to take care of my family. And again, it is a pattern for us. There is a need for us to break away. Leaving and cleaving is what we see. And we see that here with Jacob as well. We know that Jacob's contract with Laban had ended, right? And we know that time was over, but it was even past that he even had that child. And we know that Rachel had trouble having that child. So quite some time had passed at this point. But Jacob's ready to return to Canaan. But what did he want from Laban at this point? Notice how this starts. Why didn't he just leave? Go ahead, Leanne. All right. So he's ready to start building his own wealth, his own household. How does that process start then? Go ahead, Julian. All right. He wants to be his own boss. And so what we see is this pattern is when it's time to leave, you don't just take off. What's the expectation? All right.
He says, send me away.
Absolutely. That's right.
Your blessing.
He's looking for this send me away, right? I want your blessing in this. And we see that with every example of somebody who had come to the household and you have this hospitality shown to them and they asked to be sent away. You saw it the same way with the servant when he came to get Isaac's wife. And so again, please send me away. I want you to stay a little bit longer. And we have that statement here when he asked to be sent away. Now, look in chapter 31, verses 26 through 28. What was Laban's argument against Jacob later on down the line here? Chapter 31, 26 through 28. Go ahead, Mark. Yep. So my things, and what else does he accuse Jacob of? All right? Yeah. He's accusing him of theft. Why was it theft? What did Jacob fail to do, according to Laban, in chapter 31, 26 to 28? What's it say there? Go ahead, Bob.
It says you didn't do why. You're sneaking away. You've not given me opportunity.
All right. So he accuses him of, you didn't even give me the opportunity. Now, based on Jacob's past experience with Laban, let's assume Jacob would have asked. How would that have gone? It would have been very similar to this first time where he asked, and he said, stay here more, I'll give you anything you want because I don't want you to leave. And again, this impacted Jacob the second time. Now, Jacob didn't ask the second time, but he has asked. It is not the picture that was painted there. Laban did acknowledge that Yahweh, again, that same word, Jehovah, blessed him. He didn't assign it to his gods. He assigned it to the God because of Jacob in 30 verse 27. If I think about this, again, empathetically, I do see a man who doesn't want to be separated from his daughters, from his grandchildren, from this massive family that he has now been able to see. I think it would be different when it was just his daughter leaving to go and they had their family. But this familiarity that he has gained with them over time, again, if I look at him as a human like the rest of us are, a mixed bag of really great qualities and really awful qualities. If I look at him in that sense, there is a sense where I can understand the dad's wishes to be with his family, to be with his children, his grandchildren. Yeah.
Okay? Blessed, everything's grown, life is good, no hassles, no problems.
Yeah.
And so he also
Absolutely. So it is not altruism that's driving everything here. I'm sure he's a human mixed bag, but based on the character that we've seen him demonstrate more and more, it is more toward greed and what's good for Laban. How did he know that he was being blessed because of Jacob? Chapter 30, verse 27. How did he know that? All right, so there's the observable evidence that I had little and now I have much. But what does he attribute it to? By divination. I have learned by divination. What's that mean? What do we learn about him as he's gone on? This man who understood that there was a Yahweh, that there was a Jehovah. What's happened to him since? All right. We see that he has other gods, gods that can be stolen, gods that can be sat on and defiled. He has these new gods, but he has also learned from divination. Now, again, I don't know what this is, but I'm reminded of King Saul when he wanted to talk to Samuel again. God allowed, by divination, him to get that request. It doesn't mean that there's any real power in it. We know God's in control and all these things, but some way he allowed him to know that it was Jacob. But this is another occasion where he realizes his prosperity is a result of this patriarch. And that is another theme that you see throughout Genesis, that others are blessed because of a patriarch. And you'll see that continually throughout Genesis. All right, so we know that he's dishonest, that he's untrustworthy. We know that he's deceptive. We see that here, and those things are repeated. We see that he's miserly. In verse 31 of chapter 30. When Jacob says, I want to go, what is Laban's response? He said what? Chapter 30, verse 31. Notice that exchange. Somebody read that for us. All right, so what was it that Jacob wanted? The thing he ended with, I want wages. What was Laban offering him? Go ahead, Leanne. All right. Oh, wow. I hadn't thought about that. All right, so Jacob is offering reduced wages, right? But even in that exchange, what do you want? I'll give it to you. I'll give you a gift. Jacob says, no, I don't want a gift. I want wages. What's the difference for Jacob? If you're trying to establish your own, and somebody says, well, let me give it to you. I'm now still your indentured. I owe you. When we look at all the arrangements that Laban's involved in, you see this miserly quality. He was okay as long as he was getting a good deal. But when he starts feeling threatened, like somebody's getting a better deal than he does, that's when the terms start to change. So he was good with this because he was asking for the weak. Shepherds at that time would receive a little under 20% of what was growing and populating. That was kind of the expectation. And so in a flock of sheep where the sheep are mostly white and the goats are mostly black or dark brown, multicolored sheep are very rare, much rarer. And so he's offering him a really good deal. This is far less than a fifth of what you have. I'm just asking for the small ones here. And so Laban was confident that this is a good arrangement. Like he's making a good deal here with Jacob. But when this thing starts going south, what demonstrates that Laban was distrusting? How did they then make this agreement? So who's been tending Laban's flock all these years? Jacob. Who would know best where to go and separate these sheep? Jacob. Who actually did the separation? Laban. Think about that. You've not been doing this for years. But suddenly the guy who asked for his fair share makes a deal with you, you to agree to it, but who goes out and makes sure we shuffle the cards and cut them right? Laban. It tells us that he is distrusting. Even this man who has served him this well, who has grown everything that he has, he wants to go cut the cards. He wants to make sure that he separates the ones that we agreed upon. All right, a couple more things here. We see again that repetition of unethical business practices. So go ahead, Tanya. Oh, good point. That's right. That's right. Uh-huh. And he makes that barrier 3 days, if you didn't hear the comment. Very good point, Mark. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, he sent them 3 days away. Yeah, very good. As we draw to an end here, again, just a couple things. Again, you have that situation at the end where Laban forgot that Jacob paid the bridal price. These are my children. These are my grandchildren. These are my herds. I mean, even in all this, he still considered it his own despite the agreements. He never believed in those agreements. And then you see that jealousy, and at the end, you see Laban coming to terms with what is happening. He chases the man down. He can't gain anything because the Lord told him not to, and you just see him broken. He realizes he has no other option but to let him go. He's not allowed to speak good or bad. I can't offer you more, and I can't accuse you of anything else. I've just got to let it go. For me, the big takeaway here is how do I keep that thing as pure about us, right? God gives us the opportunity to change our character. And how do we maintain that change? If he was a better man at the beginning than the end of his life, he wasn't investing in God. He was bringing in idolatry. He was unscrupulous in his business practices. He continued to decay and diminish. God will let every one of us take that path. If we want to get worse and wax worse, he'll let us. But he gives us the opportunity to stay true to him. Appreciate all the comments. Thank you guys for your time this morning. And we'll end class with that.